Hey friends, how are you? 5:39. It is Thursday, September 2nd. I can't believe it's September already. So we're going to have a conversation about the Texas law that just passed, which will outlaw abortions after 6 weeks. Now, 85% of abortions are done after 6 weeks. This Texas law, in the state of Texas, this Texas law has no exception for rape or incest. Abortion seekers, abortion providers, anyone who is actually assisting someone getting an abortion can be tracked down by a private citizen who will receive $10,000 for reporting them. The bill is SB 8. And by the way, 2021, there were the most abortion restrictions signed into law since 1973. So we're going to have a conversation with Mary, constitutional law professor at Florida State University. She's also been writing for The Atlantic and some articles for CNN. She's going to give us sort of how this happened and why it happened and the reaction to it and what it might mean for people. We're also going to be talking to a writer with the 19th, which is a great journalistic organization. Hi, how are you?
Hi, Katie. How are you?
I can't believe this worked. And Chevelli, so Mary is having trouble, chevelli, getting on Instagram right now. Article called 67 Abortions in 17 Hours about a women's health clinic in Fort Worth, Texas. And so I wondered if you could just tell us a little bit about what you witnessed. And it was a pretty incredible article. And you were working with an 80-year-old doctor, I understand. Can you tell us what the scene was and what you witnessed?
So on Tuesday night, we saw that Whole Women's Health in Texas was tweeting about the fact that they had stayed open near till midnight to try to offer as many abortions as they could. Their lobby was packed, and so we called them the next morning to try to piece together what that last night looked like before this restriction went into place. And I spoke to Marva Sadler, who's the director of that clinic. That's their largest one, I think, in Texas, and she walked me through it. And really, for her, I mean, there were several moments that stuck out to me. And you probably you probably think this sometimes too, Katie. There are interviews that just stick with you, that are memorable, and this was one of them for me. She talked about the moment in late in the evening at 8 p.m. where they looked around and they thought, we're not going to get to all of the people that are here waiting for an abortion, and this law is going to go into effect. They had people in their lobbies, they had families waiting outside because of COVID restrictions. They couldn't be together. They were outside knocking on the door. What is going on? Are they going to be able to get their abortion? People waiting in cars while protesters were around them, shouting through bullhorns, shining lights into the clinic. I mean, this is a small brick building. It's this really small place, and the employees are looking through the security camera, seeing that the protesters are outside, watching them, watching every move. And so Marva talks about how she thought, they're watching us and they're winning, and this is our moment to fight back. This is our moment to try to perform as many abortions as we can for all of these folks that are here waiting. And so they went through all the way till 11:56 p.m. was the final abortion that they were able to perform that night. 67 of them, all of them performed by one doctor on staff, an 80-year-old doctor, a doctor in his 80s who's been practicing for 50 years. And it was, she describes it as a moment both of victory for them because they wanted to be able to provide this care for everyone who wanted it, but also immediate sadness because they knew that they were going to have to start turning people away after this point. In fact, they did turn someone away last night. There was one woman who came for her first appointment. You come in for an ultrasound, they determine where you are in your pregnancy, and then you have to, by Texas law, wait 24 hours before you can get your abortion. She was coming in for that first appointment, and she said, she was a drug user. She was a week away from going to prison for 5 years, and they essentially told her, she said, I don't want to have a child in prison. I have 3 other children. I don't want this to be the case. But she was 12 weeks pregnant, and she had to wait 24 hours, and that would have put her on the other side of the law, and so they couldn't perform it.
Can you talk about, well, first of all, what will the doctor do now? Is she retiring? Is she going to head to another state?
Well, Marva, the director of the clinic, they're going to continue to do as much as they can. I mean, Marva Sadler, she's been one of the folks that's been really, really involved in all of these cases before this. There's been cases in the past where Texas has tried to claw back abortion, and she has been at the center of that. Whole Women's as a whole, as an organization, has been the plaintiff in the cases that have gone to the Supreme Court, including this one that is being appealed. So they're going to continue their fight. I mean, the challenge is, and they've already seen this in the past, is they might have to close clinics. They might not be able to provide as many services. There's the number of people they can provide services to is going to shrink. And that is going to be a challenge for them moving forward. And so I think at this point, they're really just trying to get their bearings on what they can do right now, today, tomorrow. It's really kind of an hour's game right now, not even looking too far ahead.
Can you talk about the genesis of the law for a second, chevelli, and why this came to be? I know that a state senator sponsored called the fetal heartbeat law, and how it came to be in the state of Texas. I know, I'm going to be talking to a constitutional law scholar in a moment if we're able to get her to join us. But can you just give us a little background on that?
Well, I think Mary probably is going to be the expert on the origins of the law. I mean, ultimately, this is, like I said earlier, this isn't the first time that Texas has tried to do this. In 2013, a law was passed that would not only limit abortions after 20 weeks, which is a little bit earlier than Roe v. Wade, what Roe v. Wade sets forth. It's really kind of around 23 weeks when the baby can essentially live outside. And so that's really when Roe talks about. So Texas was trying to get in a little bit before that, and also add in additional restrictions for providers. You had to have attending privileges at a hospital a certain number of miles away. It was a sort of a litany of things. And so ultimately that was in effect for a while. And then in 2016, the Supreme Court sort of clawed some of that back, limited some of those restrictions. And so this has been sort of the building momentum around this. And I think what's interesting is we're already starting to hear other states that are saying, this could be a blueprint for us. Florida is already talking about, I'm based here in Florida. Florida is already talking about what that's going to look like here. And, other states are looking at this because this is something that, particularly conservative states have been, and conservative governors have been looking to try to do. And so that's the implication of a case like this in Texas.
And then, of course, the Supreme Court basically decided that it would not, by a 5-4 vote, refuse to block the law from going into effect. It's interesting. Chief Justice John Roberts joined the court's 3 liberal members in dissent. Were people surprised that the Supreme Court did that, or not particularly surprised?
I think this has been the concern for a lot of folks since we saw a court that leans conservative. And we also, this case with the Supreme Court, essentially to put it in context a little bit, essentially several reproductive clinics had asked for an emergency injunction on this case. They wanted to pause it from going into on the law, to pause it from going into effect, so that the lower courts that were already looking at it could determine, is this constitutional? Does this fall within Roe v. Wade? And so what the Supreme Court said was, no, let it go into effect. We can still look at it. I mean, that is still on the table. It's still being appealed to the Supreme Court. It's still being appealed to the lower courts. They can still look at it. It's moving through the judicial process. But this was something that I think a lot of folks were concerned about, as we saw the justices on the court. And I don't know that it comes as necessarily as a large surprise.
Yeah, in fact, they have a major abortion decision coming up, Dobbs versus Jackson's Women's Health Organization, which will consider a Mississippi law criminalizing abortion, this one after the 15th week of pregnancy. Right. So is the thought that the Supreme Court may not overturn Roe v. Wade, but will just allow these states to erode a woman's right to choose bit by bit, so that the Supreme Court really won't have to make a major decision on this?
That's the potential, right? And that's sort of what the court's decision last night alluded to, they are perhaps open to taking that road. And so that is what we're looking at now. And it's fortuitous that we also have this Mississippi case coming up very, very soon, because we will see very quickly, if unless this case comes first, how that's going to play out, how they're going to react. But I think the fact that they did not stop it from going into effect could potentially be telling as to what they decide.
What is going to happen then for women in the state of Texas who need to get abortions? Are they basically, if they're not wealthy, and many of them are living below the poverty line, will they just simply have to go to another state in order to get services? Or I know there's a lot of fear that this will set women back and make this a very dangerous thing for women who are trying to terminate their own pregnancies.
Yeah, I mean, look, all of the above, right? We're already starting to hear nearby states from Texas have, getting calls to their clinics. There's a clinic in Oklahoma that is completely booked out through September. Folks calling in from Texas to try to get in there to see if they can have an abortion. And look, the clock is ticking on abortion, right? You have a certain amount of time in which you can do this. And so you have a lot of people that are going to be, in really difficult situations. And like you mentioned, the vast majority of folks who are seeking an abortion are lower wage. That is, in fact, one of the main reasons why a person might seek an abortion. They do not feel like they can bring a child into this world. They can help to maintain that child. Maybe they have other children that they want to be able to focus on, and bringing a new child maybe would make that a more challenging situation. And so it's complicated. It's a lot of reasons why someone might seek an abortion, but really it's a lot of women of color, a lot of low-wage women who do not have access. And in a pandemic, right? How are you going to get to another state? The challenges of that, of doing that, of even raising the funds for that. The woman that I was talking about in the clinic yesterday, she had just been able to raise the funds now at 12 weeks pregnant to be able to even get there for that first appointment before her court date. We're talking about the most vulnerable folks.
And is this just for, somebody asked on Instagram, this isn't just for government funded Planned Parenthood. What does this mean for private doctors?
Oh, I mean, a restriction like this across the board affects them all. And
right.
So, it is the most restrictive form of this law that we've seen. And I think folks were expecting this week that someone was going to step in before it went into effect. And now we're going to see what that looks like in practice moving forward, because regardless of what happens, if it's changed weeks down the road, months down the road, even years, what is happening right now is going to have a ripple effect moving forward. We're already seeing it. Clinics are going to struggle to stay open. That's going to mean that people might have to, drive miles, hundreds of miles to access this care. This care is already difficult to find.
Right. And we're talking obviously about clinics that provide birth control, that provide all kinds of health services, not just abortion.
Right. Right. There are a lot. There's a whole menu of services that they provide to the community, not just abortion protection. So there's other protections that they are also providing that they will not be able to or have the funds to remain open. And we already saw that happen. Clinics closed last time Texas had a law similar to this in place. Not identically similar, but when it had another restrictive law in place for some time, we saw clinics close, including Whole Women's. Whole Women's closed several clinics in Texas.
Let me ask you that there's a very weird kind of bounty hunter aspect of law, which says, which made me envision private citizens kind of becoming vigilantes, the same people who are speaking in megaphones outside that you were at, where they're going to try to report when, as somebody who is either providing abortion, was seeking an abortion, somebody who is assisting, driving someone to a clinic, who's seen as an accomplice, they can report those people and then they get $10,000 for doing so.
Yeah, I think the most unusual piece of this legislation is just that piece that it's basically empowering people to seek out anyone who could in any way help someone get an abortion beyond the 6-week mark. And that could be, I mean, it could be anything. And what's interesting is that it's written in such a way that it's so vague that what could end up happening is you might have folks with deep pockets who have an interest in going after these cases, who are then putting doctors and family members, clinic operators, sort of in court in this litigation, because it's so, and so these people are caught up in the courts because it is so vague. And that could have a chilling effect on providers who are providing this care, who might not feel safe providing it. It could have a chilling effect on clinics who might not feel like they can viably remain open throughout a process like this. So that is a really interesting aspect, the fact that we're not just restricting abortion, but also empowering folks to ensure that no one is offering it outside of the restrictions of the law.
And were you able to talk to any of the anti-abortion activists who had gathered outside of the clinic and hear what they had to say about this aspect of this new Texas law?
No, we were not able to speak to them. We were here and sort of rebuilding the scene from what we heard of the folks in Texas. But what we know that they were saying, they were shouting to the megaphone a lot of prayer verses. They were saying, you have too many people here, you're at capacity. They were trying to clear out the clinics on the night before the law went into effect. They called the police, they called the fire marshal twice on them, essentially trying to intimidate the women and the folks who were there for abortions to try to leave or try to thin it out. And we already saw earlier in the year during the pandemic that Texas tried to cease abortion, saying it's not a necessary medical procedure, we can pause. And so we already have seen sort of some of the implications of this. But yeah, I think there was this idea of using, well, you're at capacity because of coronavirus in this case to try to clear out the clinic because it was so jam-packed with people yesterday.
And what's strange is if Roe v. Wade exists, how the federal law doesn't have any kind of authority over Texas law. I'm not a constitutional law scholar, but actually, do we have somebody who is? We're trying to find her. Which seems strange to me that I guess the Supreme Court made the decision that it would leave it up to the state by refusing to block the law, right?
I mean, that's the question that everyone has, is where does this fall into what we has already been in the books for 5 decades? On face value, it doesn't seem like it should be able to pass muster with what we already have in place with Roe, but the court seems to be saying, go ahead, and then we'll decide later.
Unfortunately, we were having Instagram problems. Mary Ziegler from Florida State University, she wrote a book called Abortion and the Law in America, Roe v. Wade. She would have, I think, enabled Chevelli some perspective. And wait, you can stay on, and I think we have Mary. Hold on 2 seconds. Luckily, I have Adriana here who is helping me with this. Wait.
Well, I think Instagram has been glitchy today too.
Yeah, I think it has as well. Let's see if we can get her to join. Was she? Did you put the check thing next to her?
We just added you.
We added you, Mary. So hopefully you can come in.
Wait.
Hold on. I don't think you necessarily put the check next to her name.
I did.
You did? Here, I'm going to do this. Mary Ziegler.
R.
Sorry. Mary initial R, Zeigle.
D-I-E.
See, isn't this fun? People can watch
Hi.
us do this.
Wait.
Thank you for your patience.
There you are.
No, you got
It still counts.
No. Back. There you
Look,
go.
I did.
Okay,
I
you
did.
did. Okay,
Thank
good.
you.
Okay, sorry. Hopefully Mary can join us. Anyway, if you all are just joining us, I'm having a really interesting conversation with Chevelli Carazana, who works for the 19th. And while we wait for Mary to join, maybe quickly explain to my followers. Oh, Mary is people to join. Sorry. Why don't you explain quickly, if you could, what the 19th is, because you're a great, relatively new news organization. And I know Emily, the founder, and I've gotten to know Amanda as well. So can you explain exactly what the 19th is?
Sure. So the 19th, we're an independent national publication covering women of color, and LGBTQ folks, the way that they're affected by policy and politics. We feel like, we launched last year during the pandemic, and what a time to launch, right? We have our first woman vice president. We had a women's recession. That's what I cover. I'm the economy reporter. We have a women's recession we're living through. We have this restriction on abortion access. I mean, we feel like there's, we feel like every story is a gender story, and in particular in the past year and a half, that has been, I think, the story of the pandemic, and it's the story now of this abortion case.
Sorry, I think we're trying one more time. Now you can do 3 people at once on Instagram. We can see your reflection. That's Adriana, everyone. She's helping me.
Okay, now I can see you.
Oh, Mary. God.
Yay. I'm here. Yeah,
You?
sorry about that, guys. I'm good. This is usually not an Instagram girl, so this is, and apparently my fake background looks really fake on Instagram, but I'm well, thanks.
Got it. So basically, thank you for doing this. Can you explain sort of how the state of Texas law that just passed can basically supersede Roe v. Wade, a federal law?
Yeah, it's a really kind of devilishly clever law. So Texas is relying on this doctrine called sovereign immunity. So there's a limited way in which you can sue states under the U.S. Constitution. And the only way you can do that is if you sue the official who's enforcing the unconstitutional law. And Texas wrote into this law that no official can enforce it. The only people who can are private citizens who can sue abortion providers, and then anyone who quote unquote aids or abets someone seeking an abortion. So Texas went to the Supreme Court and said, these people can't be in federal court because there's no one on our end, on the state's end, enforcing the law. Therefore, we have immunity. And the Supreme Court seemed to be agreeing with that, while saying essentially, we're not saying this law is constitutional, but we are saying that we have serious doubts about whether or not anyone can actually bring a lawsuit. So that's where we are, where the law may be unconstitutional, but there may be no way to ever find out.
So that's interesting. So it's the very aspect of who can enforce this law that makes it possible in Texas. So is unique to Texas, or could other states follow suit by taking advantage of this loophole?
It's totally not only Texas. My home state of Florida, the governor announced today that he was planning, and the state legislature as well, that they're planning on following this blueprint. I'm not sure who it was in Arkansas, perhaps the governor there too, who's made a similar announcement. The only reason, an interesting question is, why haven't more states already done this? Because it's not as if they're not aware of what other red states are doing. And I think the answer is that most states up until now have not wanted to do this sort of end run around Roe v. Wade. They've wanted to just directly attack Roe v. Wade and get a Supreme Court decision overruling it. And so I think what's happening now is states are seeing that they can have their cake and eat it too, right? Like they can stop abortions right now and then also ask the Supreme Court to overrule Roe v. Wade, which is something that could happen as soon as the summer of 2022.
How likely do you think? What would the repercussions be if the Supreme Court overturns Roe v. Wade?
There'd be pretty serious repercussions. You see how much attention this issue is getting just with an order from the Supreme Court letting this law go into effect, and doing so in a way that's not super easy for normal people to understand. If the court were to overrule Roe, I think there could be a pretty major backlash. And it's worth remembering that if the court were to do that in 2022, that would be literally months before the midterm election. And so the backlash wouldn't just be an abstract backlash, it would be one that could potentially play out at the polls on election day.
Can you paint a real, more states follow footsteps and utilize this sovereign immunity, or if Roe v. Wade is overturned? I think you explained in life terms, Mary, and Chevelli, if you want to, Mary, feel free, because you've been covering this so much itself. But what will for women who want a pregnancy in this country?
Well, I think the answer is going to depend on what states do next. There's sort of almost an arms race between people who support abortion rights and the state of Texas, or other states for that matter. So there are already groups that have revved up to provide access to abortion outside of Texas state lines, right? Whether that's medication abortion or abortion services, which of course is going to encourage state lawmakers to think about whether they can ban the use of abortion medication or ban going across state lines for abortion. And we don't know yet. So far, that hasn't happened. So far, states like Texas are saying that they're not going to punish women and pregnant people. They're going to just punish abortion providers and anyone who helps people seeking abortions, which is a pretty broad category. But in terms of that's kind of who wins that arms race, right? Because, and also how able are people who, particularly low-income people and people of color, to actually, leave the state of Texas to get an abortion or figure out the kind of hoops you need to jump through to get abortion medication, and that all remains to be seen.
You mentioned. Oh, go ahead, chevelli. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I think it's important to note as well that the same medication that's used in abortion is used in early miscarriages as well. And so the implications of this law go beyond. I mean, what does this look like if they think about pursuing, if legislators consider pursuing, let's make this medication harder to get. Let's make it harder to get to other states to even get an abortion. I mean, we know that people turn to trying to do it themselves in their homes with disastrous consequences. So that is what we're talking about, even though they maybe are not saying that this is punishing people who are pregnant and want an abortion. It is going to limit the options that they have. And some people will still want to pursue that, even if it could potentially be medically something that is really dangerous.
Mary, do you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's not out of the question that states will eventually directly punish self-managed abortions. There are some states that already have laws like that. And the reason that Texas isn't doing that now is because it seems politically, really stupid to do that. And I think that's because the messaging on the anti-abortion side has always been, that abortion is damaging for women and it's damaging for the unborn child. And obviously, punishing women for having abortions is damaging to women too. So far, the very strong political tendency has been to avoid that. But the reality is that when you're looking at medication abortion, sometimes there's no one else to punish because it's not easy for the state for you to reach people, for example, who are, in New York or California or New Mexico. You're not going to get that state to necessarily extradite that person, right? Because in that state, the person's not doing anything wrong. So sometimes the only option, if you're looking for someone to punish or a way to enforce the law, is going to be potentially the pregnant person, maybe their loved ones. That's one of the most extraordinary things about this law to me is the aiding and abetting provision, which is really, is pretty wild. But maybe you're able to also punish those people. It
seems pretty draconian. And the idea that, as I was saying before you joined us, to chevelli, the idea sort of like bounty hunters looking for people and getting a reward if they turn someone been aiding someone getting an abortion or even provider.
Yeah, I mean, we don't know a lot about what counts as aiding or abetting. The only clue the law gives us is that it uses the word knowing, right? So someone asked me, well, what if, a woman gets on a plane from Houston to, New York on Southwest Airlines. Could you sue Southwest Airlines for, helping to make the abortion happen? And the answer is probably not, because Southwest Airlines is not, keeping tabs on why you're taking a flight, right? So that's probably not going to be considered knowing. But for example, what if you have an Uber driver and someone says, I'm going to Planned Parenthood? Should they have reason to know? Again, I would say probably not, because you could get other services at Planned Parenthood. But you can see how people who aren't even actively trying to help may get swept into this aiding or abetting provision too. And it may, if you look at how Texas law defines aiding or abetting, in other contexts. It can include things like concealing the fact that somebody had an abortion and not having reported it, right? I mean, it can be before the fact, after the fact. So we just really don't know until the law is actually enforced. And we've seen already in Texas, groups like Texas Right to Life putting things on the internet that are designed to help people figure out how to sue people, right? Like, how do you find people who are aiding and abetting folks having abortion? Here's a how-to guide. So I think we haven't really seen a law like this before in a lot of ways, and exactly how it's going to play out, we'll just have to wait and see.
I think that was the subtext of the protesters at the clinic, that we were talking about earlier, was we are watching you. We are taking note of who you are. They were waiting there at midnight in the dark in the sidewalk, waiting to see the people coming out of the clinic. And the folks at the clinic were well within their means to perform the abortions that they performed on Tuesday up until 11:56. But I think that was the subtext, was we are watching you, and we know that we potentially have the ability to win in court if we continue to do this, and if we can point out and we can make any argument that you performed an abortion beyond the 6-week mark.
Is there, for people who believe strongly in reproductive rights, this has been a real call, I think, for a lot of the country. Supporting a woman's right to choose, what outlet do have to express the voting booth?
Yeah, I mean, I think the voting booth, I think there are things that people who support abortion rights could do better. One thing that's pretty clear that Texas is a reminder of is that opponents of abortion have really done, I think, an exceptional job at influencing state legislatures in a way that progressives really have not, and have not really been particularly interested in. I mean, if you've seen fundraising messages today, a lot of them may have been about national races or and that's great, but I mean, a lot of the action has been and will be in the states, right? If Roe is gone, it's going to depend on, like, to take where I am in Florida, for example. Florida's considering passing a law like Texas's. Florida is a purple state, right? So I mean, who's in the state legislature is not a guarantee. This is not California or Alabama. You don't know who's going to win races here. So I think voting and becoming more informed about races that are a little more obscure is really important. Maybe even donating, or if you're directing money to political races or volunteering, paying attention to those offices that are a little bit less sexy or front of mind is important. And then realizing that this is the long game. I mean, I think in a weird way, losing in the Supreme Court can be an opportunity. So I'm a historian, as you know, and I think one of the things that created the most complacency and kind of ignorance on the part of the pro-choice movement was Roe. I mean, after Roe, you see all these people in the archives saying, "Oh, we won. It's over. Like, you don't need to debate this pro-life person because we won. We don't need to bother anymore. Like, it's all set." And I think that could easily happen to anti-abortion folks who seem to think that the Supreme Court can end this. So I think this will be a potential mobilizing and organizing opportunity that won't come around very much. And it's also an opportunity to remember that the Supreme Court can't settle this. Like, they've tried and failed, and they may try and fail again, but it won't be over just because the Supreme Court says so.
Chevelli, anything else you'd like to add about?
Just to the point that Mary made about all of these races, that they matter. And I think when we talk to voters during the election, a lot of them felt like their votes or their opinions were going to be lost in the sea of other things, right? Like, they didn't have they didn't have a lot of impact. And we felt like this past election in particular, we heard from a lot of women in particular saying, I do feel like my impact is there now, and they were sort of paying attention more closely to these races. And so to that point, I feel like that is maybe a takeaway here for a lot of folks who maybe were complacent and are on the anti-abortion side and felt like this is not something that they needed to be worried about. We are seeing it right now in real time. We're seeing other states that are considering this and what that could look like. The legislators in those states who were elected and are in positions now to make a decision. So we're gonna keep on it as the 19th. I mean, this is an central issue for us, and I just really curious to see how this plays out.
All right. Well, Mary, Sadler from Florida State University Law School, our author of America wrote. Mary, thanks. I know you've had a lot of issues with Instagram, so thank you for
No problem. I think it wasn't just me, it was Instagram. I'll just tell
It's definitely
myself that
Instagram.
anyway.
It wasn't you.
Yeah, I think it
Okay.
was kind of glitchy, but really, and we'll continue to follow this story, Mary. For waking
Definitely.
her, and I'd like to amplify doing so. Us ladies to call me.
Thank you so much. We will.
Okay.
Sounds like a plan. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.